Welcome, welcome, welcome. So this is our September Moving with MS virtual support group. And as a physical therapist, we have a different topic each month focused on something related to physical therapy and multiple sclerosis. So today's topic is all about how to modify exercises. And I think this is so important because if you don't know how to modify, or when to modify, oftentimes it results in just not exercising at all, or just skipping an exercise, moving on to one that you feel like you can do successfully. But if you have ways to modify, you're even more likely to get stronger because you're able to actually do the thing that's hard, which is so important when you have MS. So if this is your first time here, an extra hello and welcome to you. My name is Dr. Gretchen Hawley, if you don't know who I am. And if you're a longtime participant of these support groups, hello and welcome to you as well. Go ahead and type in the questions or chat box where you're joining from. Just so I can see where we're all from. With this virtual platform, we have people joining from all over the US, sometimes even in different countries. But I see we've got Lynn from Florida. Welcome, welcome. We've got Julie. She says, good afternoon. It's hot from California. Not a new member. Yes, Julie. Deborah says, hello from Minnesota. Kanita from California. I was just talking to my sister who lives in California. She lives in LA. And she was saying how hot it is there. I think you guys are having like crazy heat, if I'm not mistaken. Robert says, hello, Old Bridge, New Jersey is where he's joining from. Bob, welcome. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So this is our Moving with MS virtual support group that I partner with MS Views and News with, and our supporting partner and supporter is Viatris. So a huge thank you to Viatris for supporting this support group. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about how to modify exercises. And this is so important for the main reason, in my opinion, is to allow you to have an option to exercise. Too often, we will just, not people with MS in particular, anyone will just not do an exercise if they feel like it's not effective, and they'll just move on to something else, when in reality, that might be the most effective exercise for them if they do it by modifying. So we're going to talk about why to modify, how to know when to modify, and ways to modify. And there's lots of ways. You will have access to this recording. So if you want to take notes, I'd highly encourage that. But if you don't take notes, you can just come back and watch this recording so that you can remember all the different ways. Okay, so why modify? The one that we probably all think of is if exercises are too hard. If something is too hard, that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that we can modify to make it in a way that you can do it. So if anything's too hard, that's a perfect way or a perfect excuse and reason to modify. If the exercises are taking too much energy, if you're done with your exercise routine and you feel like you can't do anything for the next few hours or for the next day or 2 days or 3 days, you've overdone it. That is too much, and it's a strong likelihood that you should modify so that you don't feel completely depleted from your energy afterwards. If you don't like your exercise routine, if you don't like your routine, realistically, you're not going to stick to it long enough where you will actually reap the benefits from it. So if you're not liking it, let's modify and find a way that you do like it so that you can stay more consistent. If your exercises are making any of your symptoms worse, it's not an excuse to not do the exercise, it's an excuse to modify. And one thing that I want to say here, because I don't know if this is in my slides, I don't think I put it in, but modifying is not a bad thing. So often I think the word modify or modification is thought to be a lesser form of an exercise, but in reality, it's not at all. Modifying allows you to do an exercise correctly, and when you're doing an exercise correctly, you're going to get more out of it. So I always tell my patients that I work with, that if possible, modify. Because the more you can do correctly, the more opportunities your brain has to not just strengthen your muscles, but strengthen those neural pathways, which when you have MS, that is the most important thing. So I would encourage you to think of modifications as a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad word. Doesn't mean you're doing anything less than someone who's not modifying. It just means to find a different version of the exercise. So ultimately, if you're feeling discouraged or defeated, that's another reason to modify. If you're not staying consistent with your exercise, that's a reason to modify. If anything is too hard or too easy, or you're exercising but it's not resulting in improvements that you're hoping to see throughout the day, that's a reason to modify. So there's lots of reasons. And again, modifying is not a bad thing. It just means changing the version or variation of the exercise. Okay, so I've got a few questions for you guys. When it comes to how to know when to modify, I'm curious if you, as you're listening to this, do you feel more fatigued and or worse symptoms during your exercise or after? So let me know, because based on what you say, there's a different way to modify. So let me know in that chat box. And I also see Deb joined us from Parkland, Florida. Welcome. And Catherine's asking, how do you get the recording? I will share a link with you when we're done with this. Let me write this down so I don't forget. I'll share a link with you guys at the end. All of the recordings are shared to the same link. It's a specific channel or playlist, I think is the right terminology, on MS Views and News YouTube channel, but I can send that to you, or you can just go to YouTube, search for MS Views and News, and it's one of their playlists. But I will send that to you guys at the end. Good question. Let's see, Deborah says, depends on the exercise if it's during or after. That's a very good point. It could be both. Sometimes people will have fatigue or worse symptoms during, but then the next time they exercise, it's after. So it can also be both. Kanita says right after. Amy says after. Hi, Amy. Natalie, I feel fatigued after. Okay, yeah, a bunch of people saying after, a few saying during. Okay, so that's really helpful. I appreciate you answering in the chat box. So here's a general guideline. So if you're someone who said that you feel fatigued during your exercises, then the way to target your modifications would be to modify during your routine using techniques that we're about to discuss. If it's after, then you should proactively modify. Getting fatigued or worse symptoms after is often harder to modify because you don't know what you did. Just overall, you did too much and now you feel this way. It's easier to modify when you feel fatigued or worse symptoms during, because your body's telling you, whoa, 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 stop, or whoa, 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 slow down, or whoa, 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 change this position, this doesn't feel good. So it's easier to modify because you're getting those signals right away. But if you're someone on a specific day where you're getting fatigued or worse symptoms after you've already stopped exercising, you need to be proactive. You need to modify proactively, basically anticipating how you might feel after and modify so that you don't feel that way. So modify even if you feel fine during your exercises. I see some more people in the chat saying, I think exercise makes me feel better. Awesome, as it should. Exercise should make you feel better. What we're talking about with modifying is if exercise doesn't make you feel better, or if exercise is too hard, or makes you more fatigued, or any of the reasons that I explained on the first slide. If you feel that you need a modification, this is how you would do that, either during or after. Okay, so ways to modify. We're going to go through each one of these, so you don't need to write this down right now if you don't want to. So there's 6 ways that we're about to review for how to modify. One is position changes. One is changing the speed. One is changing the movement. One is pausing. one is reducing exercise time, or increasing exercise time. So we're going to go through each of these so you know exactly what I mean by each thing. And we'll review this again at the end, but just want to let you know right now before we dive in, you don't have to do all of these. You could pick just one of these ways to modify, or maybe you pick 2 or 3. The way that I recommend doing it is picking the one that feels most feasible for you first, and just that one, and see if that made a difference. If it didn't, choose a different one, or maybe do 2. Do that one that you chose and a different one. So we're going to go through each of these. So ways to modify. These are all the different positions, and feel free to write these down if you will need this as a reminder, but I'm going to demonstrate in a second. There's so many different positions that we can exercise in. So standing, sitting up tall, reclined sitting, hook lying, which hook lying means lying, I'll demonstrate, but it means lying on your back with your knees bent and your feet on the floor. Hook lying with your feet up, quadruped, which is on your hands and knees, lying on your side, lying on your back, and lying on your stomach. Okay, so for the majority of movements, the majority of exercises, they can be done in all of these positions. Some might not apply, and that's okay. You'll still have several others to choose from. So these are the positions that you can always try to change the exercise in. And the way that you'll know is if it's a proper modification to you is if it feels easier and or you feel more successful. So I'm going to pause my screen or take down the slides right now so you can see me as I demonstrate marching to you. The reason marching is great is because marching means, and we'll do it in lots of positions, but it means lifting your knee up. So lifting your leg up, whether you're seated, standing, any position, you're doing this movement. And this movement is needed for things like lifting it to get out of a car, or lifting it to get in a car, or lifting it to walk forward. If you're sitting at the edge of your chair, you need to lift your leg to scoot yourself back. There's stair climbing, going up or down, stepping up on a curb. There's so many situations throughout our day where we need to lift our leg. So marching is one of the best exercises for that. So let's go through those positions. I'm going to go a little out of order just because it's going to be more feasible to demonstrate that way. So we're going to start seated. So marching in a seated position, one version was sitting up tall. So I'm sitting up tall, my core is engaged, and I'm just going to lift and lower, lift and lower. You can do all one leg and then the other side, or you can alternate like I'm doing right now. Doesn't matter too much how high you're lifting, but you're looking to use your hip flexors in this seated exercise. Now let's say that that's too challenging. In my opinion, that version is the most challenging. So let's say you might want it to be a little bit easier. Maybe you try reclining. So still sitting, but you're reclined and you do the same thing. This can be easier to lift your leg if you're reclined. So still marching, still the same exercise, you're just reclined backwards. Another version that for some people is easier, just gonna move my chair out of the way, is standing. And you can use a mobility aid if you need to. For today's purposes, I'm not going to use one. But standing and lifting and lowering. So for some people, this is easier because your hips are straighter, whereas when you were sitting, your hips were bent. So this can be easier. So lift and lower. This is the same exercise as the seated options. You're just standing instead. So this is another option. Another option, if seated or standing isn't great, then we get down into our side lying, hook lying, quadruped, etc. So I'm just going to move my screen so you can see these different options. Get this chair a little bit further out of the way. Okay, and I'm going to demonstrate on the floor, but for anything I do on the floor, just know that you can do that on your bed or on a couch. You don't have to get down to the floor. And I would encourage you not to get down to the floor if you can't get up safely, or you don't have someone nearby to help you if you end up needing help. Okay, so if we're going to be on our side, there's a few ways to do this. You can march with just your top leg, so it would look like this, or you can march with both legs, and it looks like this. The only thing about side lying is you'd want to make sure to flip over and do the same thing on your other side. So this is what the side lying marching looks like. Again, this is the same exercise as the seated or standing, but it might be easier because gravity isn't pushing you down. So for some people, this is the easier version. Let's see, another version of the exercise you can do that we talked about on that slide was hook lying. So hook lying is this position, and the way you would do marching is like this, up and down, up and down. So this is the same exercise, it's just in a different position. For some people, this is easier. For other people, it's harder because you have to keep your legs from falling out. You got to keep them up and in. Another option on that list was hook lying with your legs up or feet up. So that would be like this. And this is the exercise, so it's marching. So that's another option. What else was on that list? Lying on your stomach and lying on your back, and quadruped. So quadruped is on your hands and knees. I'll show you this way. And so marching in this position would look like this. I often don't recommend this one because it's a little awkward and it's not extremely functional. It is functional if you're looking to improve crawling, but most of us aren't looking to improve crawling, but it is an option, so I do just want to show you. So you're on your hands and knees, and you're bringing one knee forward, and then the other knee forward. This is still marching. Okay, and then the last two, one was laying on your stomach. This one I also don't recommend too often just because it's not as functional, but it's a great version of the exercise. It's when one knee is bent and you push down into the ground. So you can kind of see my hips move here. I'm pushing my knee down into the floor and then relaxing. And push, push, push. This is actually an isometric version, meaning my hip flexors aren't actually moving, but they're activating, they're tightening and relax. And then I do the same thing to the other side and relax. So that's what it looks like if I'm lying on my stomach. And then what was the other one? Lying on my stomach. I think, was that it? I think that might have been it because I did the lying on my back one. Oh, the other version, the last version. So lying on my back without my knees bent. So marching would look like this. So that's a lot of different options, but I hope what you're seeing from it is that there's no right or wrong. Those are all different options. And what I often do when I'm working one-on-one with a client who has MS and we're trying to find a version that they can do, we do all of those together. And what I'm looking for is, what does the quality look like? And what I'm looking for from them, from feedback, is which one feels easiest to you. I always want you to choose the easiest option. Once you get stronger, choose the next one that's slightly more hard, then the next one that's slightly harder, and just keep going that way until you're in the most functional position. So let me know if you have any questions on changing positions. I don't see any questions right now in the chat, so hopefully that means those were good demonstrations. But that was just marching. All of those exercises was just one exercise. It was just marching. So if you're thinking about like knee bending, you could go through those same exercises, or sorry, same positions with the knee bending exercise, or hip abduction, or whatever it is. Those are different positions that you can do. So another way to modify is from speed. So typically when you're exercising, and if you're doing the exercises with me right now, feel free to try this right now. So if you're seated, assuming you're sitting like I am, do that seated marching exercise, and you can even recline back, make it easier. So recline back and slowly lift one leg up and then lower, and then the other leg up and then lower, and go slow and see how that feels. And then do 1 or 2 repetitions where you go faster. Typically, slower is harder because it requires more endurance. It requires that you use that muscle over a longer amount of time. If you're taking 3 solid seconds to slowly lift your leg and then slowly lower it for another 3 seconds, you're using your hip flexors for 6 seconds. Whereas if you're just up, down, up, down, up, down, it might not even be 1 full second. And so you don't need to use your muscles for that long. So another way to modify would be change the speed, go slower, or go faster, depending on if you're looking to make it easier or harder. Okay, the movement is another one. So if you have more movement, typically, that's going to be more challenging. So for example, if we stick with our marching exercise, if you try, and again, you can try this right now if you want, try to really lift your leg as high as you can and then lower it down. And then the other side, lift as high as you can and then lower it down. Typically that is going to be harder than less movement. So now try to lift your leg just a little, maybe a centimeter even, just a little. Your thigh doesn't even need to leave the chair. Maybe you still feel the chair the whole time, but you're still lifting your leg up. That typically is not as challenging. So another way would be less movement if you're trying to make the exercise easier. If someone earlier said exercise makes them feel great, awesome, exercise should make you feel better. If you're looking for a way to make an exercise feel harder, then you could do more movement or the slower version or the position that is harder for you to do. So you can use these things either way to make an exercise easier or harder. Pausing is another one. So if you're looking to make an exercise harder, then you want to add a longer pause or a longer hold. So with this marching exercise, what that would look like is, and I can back up for you. So with the marching exercise, I'm going to recline to make it a little bit easier, but you're going to slowly come up, pause, 1, 2, 3, and slowly down. And then the other side, up, pause, 1, 2, 3, and slowly down. So that pause is going to be harder than if you don't pause, or maybe there's a shorter pause. Maybe instead it's up, hold for 1, and down. Up, hold for 1, and down. So a shorter pause or no pause, generally speaking, is going to be easier. So if you're looking to make it easier, that's the one that you'd go with. So reducing exercise time. So there's lots of ways to do this. So when I talk about exercise time, I mean from start to finish. Like if you were to press start on a stopwatch when you start your first exercise and then stop when you're done, reduce that time. If it normally says 45 minutes, let's try to maybe only exercise for 30 minutes or 35 or 40. And there's a few ways you can do that. One, do fewer exercises. So maybe you do everything the same, just instead of doing 7 exercises, you just do 6. Or fewer repetitions. So same exercises, but instead of doing 10 repetitions for each set, maybe you do 8 repetitions or 6 repetitions. Or same exercises, same repetitions, but fewer sets. So maybe you're doing 10 repetitions 2 times through, so 2 sets. Maybe you just do 1 set. So there's several different ways that you can reduce the time. Doing any of these 3 things will reduce the amount of time that you're exercising. And then lastly, increase your exercise time. And the way to do this is to add more rest breaks. So again, if you press start when you do your first exercise and stop when you end your last one, and it normally says 45 minutes, maybe let's aim to do the same exercise routine, but have it take 60 minutes, a full hour, or 50 minutes, so 50. Make it take longer by adding more rest breaks, so giving your body more time to rest between the exercises. I see Kanita says, trying to do slower is jerkier. Yes, that's a great comment. Is it more important to go slow or smooth? So one reason it's jerkier and like tremoring almost is because it's harder. And when you, as I mentioned, when you go slower, it requires that you use those muscles over a longer period of time, which is the definition of endurance. So if you don't have enough endurance to make it smooth, then you could still try to go slower, but not as slow. So if trying to go, for the example I gave was with marching, try to take 3 seconds to lift your leg and 3 seconds to lower. If that's pretty jerky, because you don't have the endurance to do that smoothly yet, maybe try to take 2 seconds to do it. If it's still jerky, maybe 1 second. So work your way up. You don't have to go from going really fast to going to a full 3 seconds to lift and 3 seconds to lower. There's a lot of wiggle room in there. Marching question, is it okay to lift the leg with the hand under the thigh to help lift? And any modification if ankle or leg veers to one side? For the first part of the question, is it okay to lift the leg with a hand under my thighs? Yes and no. Ideally, no. Ideally, you would not use your hand, because the harder it is, the more your brain is working. And the more your brain is working, the more likely you are to get those neural pathways working. With that said, if you have no movement or very little movement, it can be helpful to use your arms, use your hands to help you lift for a few repetitions, just so your brain understands what it is that you're trying to even do. So what I would suggest, if you feel like you have to use your hands, is maybe just do 3, 4, or 5 repetitions using your hands and your arms to help you lift and lower, but your hands are just helping. Your legs should still be doing the majority of the work. Your arms are just there to assist, and then stop using your arms and do more repetitions without using your arms. But hopefully using your arms can get your brain understanding what motion you're trying to get to work. So yes and no, if you do use your arms, make sure it's not the whole time and that they're just helping. If your arms are feeling sore after, you're doing too much work with your arms, and choose a different position that's easier. So maybe lying on your side is going to be easier where you don't have to use your arms. The second part to that question was any modification if ankle or leg veers off to the left. So if it's not straight. If it's not straight, that typically means you have weakness in your hip, specifically the inner or outer part of your hip. So it could be a different exercise to help with that, or choose a variation. Again, try all those, I think it was maybe 7 different positions. Try all those 7 positions. Is any one of them easier in a way where you don't notice that veering, or at least you don't notice it as much? If so, choose that position, get really good at it, and use it as a way to not let your legs veer, and then choose a different option once you get stronger from there. So as we talked about in the beginning, what do? I just gave you tons of different ways to modify. Like if we were to write down each position as a different way to modify, plus each of those 5 other ways to modify in the specifics, that's probably 20 different ways to modify one single exercise. So what do? That's so many options. So first and foremost, just try one way of modifying and see if it helps. Maybe the first thing that you want to try is to change the position. Or maybe you're thinking, nope, seated is what's easiest for me, so I'm going to stay with the seated option. I'm going to try to go faster because that's going to make it easier. Great, maybe you try the speed, or maybe you decide I'm not going to lift as high, so less motion, less movement. Great, so choose one thing to make it easier, or harder if you're looking to make it harder. And then analyze, did that help? If so, great, just stick with that one. And again, for those of you who said that you feel your fatigue or worsened symptoms or extreme muscle soreness after, what you're doing is modify the exercise routine, and then after you're asking yourself, okay, by this point, 4 hours after my exercises, usually I'm feeling a 7 out of 10 level of fatigue, or you know how you normally feel. At this time, with that modification that I did earlier, how am I feeling? Is it just as much fatigue? Is it more or less? Is it just as much of a worsened symptom, just as much of poor balance or whatever it is, or not? And you're just analyzing. If that did help, great, that's what you need to do moving forward. If it didn't help, try two things. So maybe you try to stay seated because you love that position, but you're going to go faster and you're not going to lift as high, or whatever two options you want to choose, and then so on and so forth. Another option, listen to your body. One might just make most sense for you based on what your body is telling you. If you feel like going faster is the right thing to do and that feels better, it feels good for you to do that versus going slow, then listen to your body. Trust it that you're not taking the easy way out. You're just finding a version that is doable for you. So again, making sure you're not feeling guilty for modifying or taking the easy way. That's not it at all. Listen to your body. If something feels too hard, pick one of these ways to modify. If it feels too easy, pick one of the ways to modify so that it's harder. And then lastly, have 2 to 3 plans, exercise plans or exercise routines, because as we all know, with MS, every day is different. So even this whole conversation about modifying and then analyzing afterwards, how did it feel for you? That's really hard to do because yes, it might have felt like a good modification today, but you might do the same thing and tomorrow it feels just as bad as it did the first time. So MS is just so varying. But if you know that today is a higher fatigue day for you, then you should probably be doing an exercise routine that's a little bit easier, that doesn't require as much energy. But if tomorrow is a day where you have more energy, you should be doing an exercise routine that allows you to use more energy because you have it. And so when I'm working with my clients, we usually at least have 2 different programs, one for a day where they're just really fatigued, and then one for a day where it's a normal day for them. And then sometimes we'll even have a third plan. If they're having a great day, they've got some other options for them. You don't have to do the same routine or the same exercises every day, because with MS, your symptoms change every day. So pick some exercises and some modifications that might be appropriate for you based on which type of day you're having. I see a question that says, I'm 4 months post HSCT and I'm finding everything impossible. I'm trying my hardest to do hip exercises, but I also need to grab my leg to move it, and I just feel stuck. Drop foot doesn't help. Okay, I just want to remind everyone, and this is an important thing to discuss during our talk on modification, that success with an exercise, any exercise, does not mean lots of movement. So often when we're exercising, we're looking for movement as a form of success. Like, look how much I'm bending my knee. Yay, success, I'm doing it well. Or look how much I'm lifting my leg. Awesome, the higher I lift, the better that is. But when it comes to MS, and then anything else too, but specifically MS, you might not be moving a lot or at all, but that doesn't mean that you're not strengthening your neural pathways. So to take it back to basics, when you have MS, yes, of course, you want more strength in your muscles. But before your muscles can get strong, the first thing that needs to get strong is the connection between your brain and your muscles, which is your neural pathways. And we have a whole talk that we've done with this Moving with MS series on neuroplasticity and on functional exercise. And that's what I'm talking about here. But the way to strengthen that brain to muscle connection is via neuroplasticity and functional exercise. So actually, let me share, while we're on this topic, I'm going to share the link with you guys to the playlist that MS Views and News has that has all of these recordings. Let me type it here. I'm going to send it in the chat. So if you're not seeing movement, let's say just with the exercise that I'm doing here, the marching exercise, let's say you're trying to do it and it doesn't lift at all. You should still do the exercise. It's not a reason to skip it and move on to the next exercise. First and foremost, try to modify, maybe change the position. Can you lift your leg at all, even 1 centimeter in any of those positions that were mentioned? If so, practice the exercise in that position, even if it's only moving 1 centimeter. If not, if you've practiced all those positions and none of them work, it's not moving at all, that's okay. Choose whichever one is most feasible for you. For most people, that's a seated position or a seated reclined. And practice the exercise over and over and over again, that repetition. And what success equals is the amount of effort you're putting in. So even if there's no movement, if you're putting in 100% effort, you are just heavily focusing on lifting, nothing's happening, but you're trying, that equates to your brain trying to find a neural pathway, find a way down to that muscle. Even though you didn't see movement, your brain is working on trying to make that happen. So success isn't the amount of movement that you see. Success is the amount of effort that you're putting in. And it's big coincidence that I was reading this yesterday, but I'm reading a book, and it was talking about, it was a finger exercise. This book has nothing to do with MS. It's more about mindset. But they were quoting a study that there were 2 groups of people that were looking to improve their finger strength. And there were 3 groups actually. One group didn't have any exercise routine, so they were like a placebo group, if you will. Another group, they were tasked with doing an exercise of lifting their fingers a certain number of times per day for a certain number of weeks. So they were doing an actual exercise of lifting their finger. The third group wasn't actually doing an exercise, they were visualizing themselves doing it. So they weren't actually moving their fingers, they were visualizing lifting their fingers. And what they found, the placebo group, the group that didn't do anything, saw no improvement. The group that did actually practice the exercise improved their finger strength by 54%, I believe it was. And the group who just visualized, did not practice, they just visualized, improved their strength by 35%. So less so than the ones that actually did the exercise, but they still improved by 35% just from visualizing their body doing that. So that goes right along with neuroplasticity, that visualizing and attempting and practicing, like combining those 2 groups, has so much power, even if you're not seeing any movement. So I'm trying to not go off on too much of a soapbox about that, but just know if you're not seeing movement, that's okay. Modify in these ways. See if you can find a movement that does feel like you can be successful at it. If not, still do it, but maybe modify by using assistance. Maybe you do use your hands while making sure your hands are just assisting. If your arms are getting tired because you're using them so much, you're probably not putting enough effort into your legs, or your arms are just trying to overcompensate too much. Or maybe you use a strap or a resistance band or another human being to help. There's other ways to modify than what we're discussing here, which is ways to modify by yourself. But just know that you can still do the exercise even if you don't see movement, and you can still see success over time, even if you're not currently seeing movement. Okay, I hope that helps. Let me know if that helps. Thank you so much. How long should someone so weak try and exercise for? That's a great question. So generally speaking, there's no research on this, like saying if you do this number of repetitions, this many sets for this many weeks, that's what's best. So what I typically recommend is doing an exercise up to 30 good quality repetitions, or if you're not seeing movement, up to 30 repetitions of you putting as much effort in as possible. But you're not doing all 30 at once, it includes rest breaks. So I'm just going to call out some names. So maybe Natalie does 5 repetitions and then she takes a break. And then she does 5 more and then takes a break. And then maybe 3 more and then takes a break. Then maybe later on throughout the day, she does 10 or 2. You can separate it. And then cumulatively, by the end of the day, you've done it 30 times. Whereas Stephanie might do 15 and then she takes a break, and then maybe 10 because she was a little fatigued and didn't want to do poor quality, so she takes a break, and then 5, and then that's 30 as well. So it doesn't matter how you get to 30, but 30 is the general number of repetitions that I will suggest my clients do. What does it mean when I get mentally fatigued when trying to increase my walking distance? Mental fatigue is real, and MS strengthening exercises take a lot of mental energy. So what does it mean when you're getting fatigued? If anything, I would say your brain is trying to work really hard to get those neural pathways working. Your brain is focusing so much on doing the right movement and lifting enough that it's getting fatigued. And you would rest it just as you would rest any other body part. So if you feel that fatigue, mental fatigue kicking in, if you can, stop and rest. You're trying to work your walking distance. So maybe your rest break is just standing, hanging out, just stand, take a break, maybe think about something else, some deep breaths, give your mind a rest. Maybe if you're outside, focus on what colors you see, or I'm looking outside right now and trying to think, how tall is the grass? Are there any flowers? What texture are the flowers? Like, just think about something completely different and then continue on. So impressed, you expressing and explain things so wonderfully. Oh, thank you, Rick. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so yeah, so ways to modify. So again, just choosing one, moving on from there, listening to your body, having a few different plans. Because in my mind, the most important piece of an exercise routine is doing it consistently and feeling good about it. If you don't feel good about it, you're not going to stay consistent for the long haul. And when you have MS, consistency for the long haul is so important, potentially the most important. I would put it up there with neuroplasticity and functional exercise. So making sure that you have something that feels doable for you. Okay, so that was my last slide. So these are the different ways that you can reach me. If you're looking to reach out via email, or my website is missinglink.com. I have a podcast, a YouTube page, a book and audiobook. There's also lots of other ways to reach me. On most platforms, I'm Dr. Gretchen or the Missing Link. So I'm just going to show you visually what you can do, youtube.com, to find MS views and news. I haven't done this in a while. So if you search for Moving with MS, that's where you're going to see all the ones that have been uploaded. And so you'll see the topics of physical therapy, analyzing your walking, that's one of my favorite ones, hand and arm strengthening. I bet you could search their channel for, if you're looking for a specific topic, neuroplasticity. Oh, neuroplasticity. There we go. So neuroplasticity is right here. So that's what you can do. I do think they have a playlist on. I just don't want to take too much time right now looking for it. But that's where you'll be able to see our segments that we have. Okay, I think, so I see Kanita asked a question. There's some typos in there. I'm trying to make sense of it. Oh, maybe any advice on early or late, before or after 3 meals? Any advice? When it comes to meals, I'm not sure if you're referring to exercising and meals. Any advice on early, late, before, on exercising? I'm going to assume that maybe the question means exercising in relation to eating. Not necessarily. I have some patients that I work with who feel so much more energized after a meal. Like they feel like they walk better after, their strength is better, their balance is better, so they will do their exercises after a meal. I have other patients who it's the opposite. They feel like they do better before a meal because after they eat, they feel a little bit more sluggish. And so I think that's more of a personal preference. I think that answers that question. If I missed the mark, please type it again and let me know. All right, any other questions, comments, thoughts? As I'm waiting to see if anyone does have anything, just another shout out to MSVs and News. Thank you for partnering with me so that we can offer this live virtual support group, and to Viatris, who is our supporter. Deepa says, when I sidestep, I get pain in my upper thighs. So sidestepping, so anytime you have something specific, and especially if it's something specific that relates to pain, like when I do X, I have pain in this specific area, I would always recommend seeing an in-person physical therapist to help with that. No exercise, even if you have MS, no exercise should increase pain. And it's so important to get an evaluation to see why that pain is happening. So when you sidestep, you get pain in your upper thighs. Where in your upper thighs? You know, it might be, if you're feeling that pain in the front of your upper thighs, that might be hip flexor pain. And maybe you're feeling that because of muscle tightness in a specific area or muscle weakness in a specific area. Same thing if that pain is on the outside or inside or back. Oftentimes it's due to an imbalance. It could be due to, again, weakness in some areas, tightness in different area or multiple areas. And oftentimes it could even be due to weakness or tightness not in your hip. It could be something going on in your low back or maybe even your knee, but you're feeling it in your hip. In the physical therapy world, what we're trained to do is when someone comes in with pain in a specific area, very rarely do we first look at that joint. We look at the joint above and the joint below, because 9 times out of 10, the issue is actually stemming from above or below, not the actual location. Oftentimes it might be both, the actual location and above or below, but very rarely is it just that specific area. So again, if you are having pain in any area, no exercise should increase pain. So go to a physical therapist in person, see if they can help you determine why it's happening, and then specific exercises to help with that. Thank you for your time and explanation. I'm going to try my best. Awesome. I appreciate your advice, and I'm really interested in neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is amazing. It is just, I mean, the possibilities that it allows, and it's research-based. Research shows this time and time again. I actually have a video of neuroplasticity happening. If we have a second, I'll try to pull it up and show you. But it's just fascinating. So. Not pain, just soreness. Yeah, and so soreness could be, again, it's important to figure out why the soreness is happening, and is it normal soreness that goes away after up to 2 hours, or is it lasting for a while? If it's normal soreness, that's fine. If it's lasting a while, again, try to figure out with a PT, why is it happening? Why is it lasting that long? Are you pushing too much and you need to modify? Do you need to add stretching to that specific muscle that you're feeling soreness in after your exercises every time? So what strategies do you need to implement so that you're not feeling that discomfort? Let me see, we do just have a few minutes. And if you do have questions, please ask, but I just want to quickly see if I can find this neuroplasticity. This video is so fascinating. If I can pull it up. I don't think I'm going to be able to find it. It's a video showing what neuroplasticity, what the cells look like. Sharing. Okay, yeah, you can see what I see. All right.
So if you watch the end here and here, the 30-second clip, you'll see that over time it's growing. It's creating a brand new connection. And the reason this is happening could be due to a new experience, repetition of exercises, a new thought pattern, changes of your perception. We'll get more into these things. But basically, by repeating these over and over again, you can see the growth of the neural pathway.
So that was part of a webinar that I did on neuroplasticity at one point. Okay. Let me get back. I think I did see a question come in. It didn't matter if you couldn't hear that. It was just a video showing the growth of those neural pathways. Exercise bands, stretchy or not. If you're stretching, I recommend not having stretchy, so no stretch in your bands. If you're doing strengthening exercises, then I would go for stretch. Then again, there's a different isometric exercises, which I discussed a little bit earlier briefly. When you're doing an exercise, but your muscle's not actually changing length. That's what an isometric exercise is. That would be if you used a non-stretchy strap. So for strengthening, it could go either way, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're in the missing link, we actually have classes specifically for isometric exercises, and some we use a band, some we don't. But yeah, so stretching, no stretch in the band. Strengthening, it could be either, depending on your goal. All right, well, I don't see any other questions, so I will let you guys go, but thank you so much for tuning in. I love hosting these every month, so again, thank you to Viatris, our supporter, and to MSCS and News, and to all of you guys who show up live, and anyone who is watching the recording as well. It feels so good. It makes my heart happy to be able to share this information with you. The reason why I'm so passionate about sharing via support groups is because I will never forget my first experience sharing information at a support group. I went with a presentation very similar to the ones that I share with you guys, and I remember feeling so silly, like everyone here has MS. They know how to exercise with MS. They've probably been to physical therapy. Like, who am I to share this information with them? They probably already know it. And I truly felt just so silly for sharing it with them. But as I was sharing it, every single slide, people were writing down as many notes as they could. And there were so many questions after, and it was just so clear to me that this group of people with MS had never been told this information before. And it's all information that I feel like everyone with MS needs to know this. Like, how can they not know this information? And so ever since that one experience, I just feel so passionate about sharing all of this with you so that you feel more in control over what might be going on with your MS, and you feel more empowered, whether that's just in changing your exercise routine, like we talked about today, or asking your physical therapist or your neurologist certain questions to make sure you get the best care, just knowing that this information exists. So thank you for tuning in live or watching the recording for all of these support groups. I really appreciate it. You're very appreciative. Oh, thank you. All right, well, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys next month. Bye, everyone.